They'll never admit it out loud, but every avoidant has a secret fantasy about love. Not the kind of love they publicly reject or pretend not to need. Not the chaotic, consuming kind that demands emotional exposure. Their fantasy is quieter, almost invisible. It's the dream of being loved without being chased, of being chosen without being cornered. It's a love that sees them completely, yet never asks for more than they can give. That's the hidden fantasy every avoidant carries, to be deeply known without ever feeling trapped by that knowing. Avoidant individuals live between two emotional poles, craving closeness while fearing it. On the surface, they seem disinterested, independent, and self-contained. But beneath that calm, there's a hunger for safety, for understanding, for connection that doesn't cost them their autonomy. Their fantasy isn't about control, it's about freedom within connection. They long for someone who understands their silences instead of filling them. Someone who doesn't interpret distance as rejection, but as breathing room. Someone who stays steady, not by chasing, but by simply being there. It's easy to mistake this fantasy for coldness, but it's really about emotional safety. For the avoidant, love feels dangerous, not because they don't want it, but because it threatens the delicate balance of independence that keeps them feeling safe. What they secretly wish for is a love that doesn't demand surrender. A love where they don't have to explain why they pull away sometimes, where absence isn't punished and presence isn't forced. Deep down, they dream of a partner who can hold both truths, that they need space and that they still care. Someone who can say, "I see you," even when you disappear. That's the kind of intimacy that feels safe enough for them to actually want it. But because it's rare, almost mythical, it becomes a fantasy, not a plan. They wait for someone who can meet them there, in that paradox between closeness and freedom. And the irony? That hidden fantasy reveals everything they try to hide. Their capacity for love, for tenderness, for emotional depth they've spent a lifetime avoiding. If you want to better understand how to deal with avoidance, then subscribe to the channel to know everything. For avoidance, control is love's security blanket. It's not about power in the traditional sense, it's about survival. Control means predictability. Predictability means safety. And safety, to someone who fears emotional engulfment, is everything. But in their hidden fantasy, love doesn't have to cost them that control. In this imagined space, love feels spacious, breathable, something they can move through, not something that swallows them whole. Their fantasy partner doesn't invade. They invite. They don't demand closeness. They allow it to unfold naturally, like a slow sunrise. The avoidant dreams of being understood without being interrogated, of having their silences honored instead of feared. They picture someone who can hold a pause in conversation without assuming rejection. Someone who knows when to lean in and when to let go. In their imagination, love is a quiet understanding, not a performance. It's eye contact that doesn't demand explanation, touch that doesn't insist on permanence. It's the freedom to come and go emotionally without the relationship collapsing. This is their ultimate fantasy, to be deeply bonded without feeling owned. But here's the paradox. Even this fantasy exposes the depth of their longing. Because to imagine being seen without pressure, they have to imagine being seen. To dream of safety and love, they must acknowledge the ache that safety was missing. The fantasy is born not from arrogance, but from emotional deprivation. Somewhere deep down, every avoidant knows what they've lost by keeping love at arm's length. They just don't know how to reach for it without burning. This hidden vision of love, calm, patient, forgiving, becomes a sanctuary in their mind. It's the one place where connection doesn't hurt, where vulnerability doesn't equal danger. They imagine being loved not for their performance, but for their pace. They imagine a love that waits without pushing, stays without smothering, understands without analyzing. And though they may never say it, this fantasy isn't just about love, it's about redemption. A hope that one day, someone might love them in a way that makes closeness feel like peace, not pressure. The walls an avoidant builds aren't made of arrogance or cruelty. They're made of fear, the quiet, invisible kind that was learned early and reinforced often. Somewhere along the way, love became unpredictable, connection became conditional, and safety became something they had to protect by staying out of reach. Over time, distance turned into a defense, and independence became their disguise for loneliness. But even behind those walls, there's longing. Not the loud, desperate kind, but the quiet ache that shows up in subtle ways. The late-night scroll through messages they'll never send, the moment they replay an old conversation, the flicker of envy when they see others connect so easily. They won't call it loneliness. They'll call it space. But the heart knows the difference. In their hidden fantasy, someone sees through the silence, not to break it, but to respect it. This person doesn't ask the avoidant to explain their distance. They simply stand at the gate and wait with calm eyes. No accusations, no ultimatums, just understanding. And in that patience, the avoidant begins to imagine what safety might feel like if it didn't come from solitude. What they crave most isn't grand passion or constant contact. It's emotional safety. To know that their moments of retreat won't be punished, and their need for space won't be mistaken for rejection. They want to be trusted, even when they withdraw. They want love to feel like a choice, not a trap. But this longing comes with conflict. The more they yearn for closeness, the more dangerous it feels. To be known is to be exposed, and to be exposed is to risk loss. So they push love away, not because they don't care, but because caring feels like standing too close to the fire. Still, the fantasy persists. In it, love doesn't chase. It waits. It offers warmth without engulfing. It speaks softly, not with demands, but with presence. It tells them, "You can come back when you're ready, and I'll still be here." That idea, that they could be loved without being controlled, becomes the most dangerous and beautiful thought of all. It's not something they admit, but it's something they feel. Every avoidant secretly dreams of someone who just gets it. Someone who doesn't make them explain their distance, justify their silences, or apologize for needing space. In their hidden fantasy, love flows without friction. There's no endless cycle of reassurance and reaction, only quiet understanding. The other person somehow knows that their retreat isn't rejection, it's regulation. It's how they find their balance before coming close again. This fantasy is powerful because it promises what reality rarely gives them: peace inside connection. For most avoidants, relationships feel like emotional negotiations, constant adjustments between their need for solitude and their partner's desire for closeness. That tension exhausts them. But in their imagination, they meet someone who never takes their distance personally. Someone secure enough to stay grounded, unoffended, and steady even when they withdraw. They imagine coming home from a long day, saying nothing, and being met not with questions but presence. Just a quiet hand resting near theirs. A partner who doesn't demand explanations, who trusts their love without proof. In that world, vulnerability doesn't have to be forced. It simply happens because it feels safe enough to emerge. It's easy to dismiss this as an unrealistic fantasy, but it's actually their map, a reflection of what healing could look like. Because underneath the dream of effortless understanding lies a truth: they don't want to be alone. They just want to be accepted in the way they love, slowly, carefully, sometimes clumsily. They want to be met with patience, not pressure. The tragedy is that avoidants often chase this fantasy by doing the opposite of what would make it real. They hide, they detach, they test. They wait for someone who won't leave, but their distance becomes the very thing that pushes love away. They want understanding, but they make themselves impossible to understand. And yet, the fantasy remains, because it's the only space where they believe love could feel like freedom. In that imagined world, connection doesn't demand sacrifice. It's gentle, reciprocal, wordless, and maybe, just maybe, it's what they've been craving all along: not to be pursued, but to be understood. Deep down, Every avoidant dreams of being chosen, not for what they do, not for how strong they appear, but for who they quietly are beneath the armor. Their hidden fantasy isn't about perfection or pursuit. It's about being accepted without needing to perform. They want to be loved not in spite of their distance, but through it. To most people, love is built on presence, attention, affection, availability. But for an avoidant, love often feels like performance, smiling when they feel detached, showing up when they want to retreat, saying, "I'm fine," when they're anything but. They've learned that connection often comes with invisible expectations. Be open, be vulnerable, be more. And over time, that pressure becomes unbearable. So they fantasize about a love that asks for nothing. In that dream, they don't have to translate their emotions into words. They don't have to fix their patterns before being worthy of affection. The person who loves them doesn't need constant reassurance, doesn't read distance as betrayal, and doesn't confuse silence with disinterest. This love feels steady, grounded, patient, like a quiet acceptance that says, "You don't have to earn this." What makes this fantasy so intoxicating is how opposite it feels from their reality. Avoidants often grow up feeling like love must be managed, that too much emotion will lead to rejection, too little will lead to abandonment. So they learn to self-protect through composure. But beneath that calm exterior lies exhaustion, the fatigue of always controlling how much of themselves they show. In their fantasy, that control finally drops. They imagine a love where they don't need to measure every word or manage every feeling. They can exist, unedited, untested, unjudged. Someone sees them in their stillness and stays. Not to fix, not to chase, but to witness. And that's what every avoidant secretly craves, to be seen in their emotional silence and not mistaken for coldness. To be loved without the pressure to perform. To finally rest in love without feeling they have to protect it, or themselves, from falling apart. Avoidants rarely talk about it, but beneath their independence lies a quiet wish, to finally let go without fear. To stop analyzing, controlling, and guarding every emotion. To experience what it feels like to surrender in love and still feel safe. This is their most forbidden fantasy, a connection that doesn't demand defense. It's not surrender in the dramatic, all-consuming sense. It's not losing themselves in someone else. It's the gentler version, emotional rest. The ability to lean in without calculating risk. To say, "I missed you," without fearing it will be used against them. To trust that love can hold them even when they're not performing strength. For someone who's spent a lifetime equating vulnerability with danger, this fantasy feels like an impossible luxury. They imagine lying next to someone who feels calm, who doesn't need constant reassurance, who doesn't make their silence mean something it's not. The kind of person who doesn't fill the space with questions, but with quiet safety. In that space, the avoidant finally exhales. They don't have to retreat to feel whole. Connection itself becomes the safe place. It's hard for avoidants to admit that they crave dependence, not in the clingy sense, but in the human sense. They want to rely on someone without losing autonomy. To be able to say, "I need you," and still feel free. But because this balance is so rare, they often protect themselves from even hoping for it. It's easier to believe that true safety only exists in solitude. Yet the fantasy persists. The image of being emotionally held, not fixed, not analyzed, but simply held in understanding. They imagine someone touching their hand when they pull away, not to stop them, but to remind them they're not being abandoned. That they can go, and they can come back, and the connection will still be there. For the avoidant, that's not just romance. It's transformation. To experience love that doesn't require escape would rewrite their entire emotional script. It's not about passion or drama. It's about stillness. The moment they realize that surrender and safety don't have to be opposites, that maybe, in the right love, they could finally rest. Avoidants often fear that if they're not expressive enough, not verbal, not emotionally transparent, they'll lose love. So they withdraw before they can disappoint anyone. But in their secret fantasy, love doesn't need to be proven in words. It simply exists, quiet, steady, unshaken. A connection that feels present even in silence. They imagine long drives with music instead of conversation, a kind of closeness that doesn't demand emotional translation. Just knowing glances, soft gestures, the safety of not having to explain what's already understood. For them, that's intimacy, the absence of pressure to constantly perform understanding, the peace of being known without narration. Avoidants often find verbal intimacy exhausting. Every "how do you feel?" can sound like an interrogation. Every emotional check-in feels like exposure. So in their fantasy, there's none of that tension. There's a partner who reads the subtle cues, the shift in tone, the pause before a word, the way they lean back instead of forward. That kind of intuitive connection feels like magic to them because it's the one form of closeness that doesn't threaten their autonomy. They want to be felt, not analyzed. Understood through presence, not pressure. In that imagined love, they don't have to defend their need for quiet. Silence becomes sacred, a shared language instead of a void. And the irony is that for someone who fears being consumed, that kind of connection would allow them to open up more deeply than any conversation ever could. In this fantasy, love feels like balance. It's not intense or overwhelming. It's grounding. It's a partnership where emotional quiet isn't mistaken for disinterest, where both people know that connection doesn't always live in words. Sometimes, it lives in the breath between them. For the avoidant, this is heaven. Being seen in the quiet moments, loved without having to explain why they struggle to express it. It's not the absence of emotion. It's the freedom to feel without fear of being misunderstood. Because deep down, what they truly want isn't distance. It's peace. And silence, when met with trust instead of insecurity, becomes the safest sound they know. For the avoidant, love feels safest when it doesn't depend on them. Dependency, even gentle, healthy dependency, can feel like suffocation. But being irrelevant feels just as unbearable. So they live caught in that paradox. They want to be missed, but not needed. To be desired, but not depended on. And that tension forms one of their deepest fantasies. In their hidden vision of love, someone thinks about them often, but not obsessively. Misses them when they're gone, but keeps living fully in their absence. The avoidant wants to feel significant, not as a savior or a caretaker, but as a steady presence in someone's mind. They long to know they matter without being responsible for someone else's happiness. It's the difference between being chosen and being obligated, and for them, that difference means everything. In this imagined love, the other person doesn't crumble when the avoidant pulls away. They don't plead or panic. They simply trust that distance isn't a threat. That love doesn't disappear when silence enters the room. For the avoidant, that kind of response feels revolutionary. It says, you're free to leave, and you're still loved when you do. What makes this fantasy so potent is how it reverses their lifelong fear. Avoidants are used to the idea that love comes with demands, emotional availability, constant reassurance, proof of devotion. But in their fantasy, they're loved without the cost of expectation. They can breathe. They can disappear for a while without guilt or punishment. And when they return, they're welcomed, not scolded, not questioned, not shamed. Just seen. This fantasy isn't about wanting less intimacy. It's about wanting safe intimacy. A kind of bond that doesn't make them feel trapped by someone else's need. Where love exists as two whole people choosing each other, not two halves clinging for completion. Being missed, but not needed, lets the avoidant finally believe that love can exist without loss of self. It offers them what they never had growing up, the freedom to belong without vanishing. The assurance that they can have love and space, and that both can coexist without punishment. For the avoidant, that balance feels almost mythical, but it's also the only kind of love they would truly stay for. Avoidants often live with a quiet shame, a sense that they're somehow defective when it comes to love. They know their distance hurts people. They see the disappointment in others' eyes when they pull away. And while they seem cold, the truth is that guilt cuts deep. They just don't know how to bridge the gap between wanting closeness and fearing it. So their secret fantasy? To be loved without needing to change first. In their imagination, they meet someone who doesn't treat their guardedness like a problem to fix. Someone who doesn't say, "Why can't you just open up?" but instead says, "I know it's hard. Take your time." That's the fantasy, a love that welcomes them as they are, not as who they might become after enough healing. It's not that avoidants don't want to grow. They do. But they crave a kind of love that doesn't make growth a condition for acceptance. A love that can hold their contradictions, the independence and the longing, the silence and the need to be seen. In their dream, love isn't a battlefield of emotional expectations. It's a sanctuary where they can slowly rediscover trust. They imagine a partner who doesn't label their space as rejection, who doesn't flinch at their emotional pauses. Someone who can sit beside them in the quiet and still feel connected. That simple, patient love feels like redemption, not because it fixes them, but because it shows them they were never broken to begin with. For an avoidant, this fantasy represents healing without humiliation. It's being loved not in spite of their fears, but through them. A partner who sees their detachment not as a wall, but as a wound. Someone who doesn't demand that they tear it down overnight, but instead gently waits while they learn how to open the gate. In that imagined love, they finally experience what they've always secretly wanted: acceptance without effort, belonging without performance, connection without control. The kind of love that doesn't ask, "When will you change?" but whispers, "You don't have to earn this." And though they may never admit it, that's the fantasy that haunts them the most, because deep down, they know that being loved in that way would heal every reason they ever learned to run. Every avoidant carries one secret truth they rarely admit, even to themselves. They don't actually want to be alone. They want to be free within love, to love without losing themselves, to be chosen, seen, and accepted, all while staying intact. Their hidden fantasy, all the silent dreams of being understood, respected, missed but not needed, safe yet connected, isn't about distance. It's about dignity inside closeness. What they want isn't isolation. It's safety, a kind of love that doesn't turn intimacy into invasion. They want someone who can love them softly enough that their defenses don't have to shatter. They can simply lower. Someone whose calm steadiness feels like permission to exhale, to stop performing strength, to finally say, "I'm scared, but I'm here." And maybe that's the ultimate irony. The love they fear most is the one that would free them. Because that fantasy of being loved without pressure, seen without judgment, wanted without control, reveals something essential. It's not about escaping intimacy. It's about rewriting it. For the avoidant, that fantasy is a mirror. It reflects the love they wish they had growing up, safe, predictable, patient, unafraid of their quietness. It's a love that says, "You don't need to change for me to stay." It's the healing of every unspoken wound. And though they might never speak it aloud, every avoidant hopes that someday someone will love them in this way, gently enough that love stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like home. Because deep down, they don't want to run forever. They just want to stop being afraid. They want to reach a place where they can be held without panic, seen without shame, loved without losing themselves. That's the hidden fantasy, and the truest one. It's not about finding the perfect person. It's about finding peace inside connection. Love, for them, isn't the loss of freedom. It's the discovery that freedom and closeness can coexist when love is kind enough to allow it. And maybe that's where healing begins, when the fantasy no longer has to stay hidden, when love finally feels safe enough to be real. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep learning how to love without fear.